The book I chose was written by Frederick Douglass. It's the name of the book is The Narrative of the Life of the Frederick Douglass. This book was published in 1995, and I read every word in the book from page to page and from cover to cover. This book was about the life of Frederick Douglass as a slave. It talks about how what all he endured being a slave, um, and he talks about how he never knew exactly when was his birthday because he was born into slave. He knew who his mother was. He was born. His mother was a slave, and he believed that his father was one of the slave owners, but that never was acknowledged. And so, at the age of 6, he had experienced what slave life was about on a plantation. He was able to see the slaves, how they were treated, what all hard work they had to do, how they worked from sun up to sundown with hardly no food to eat. He also witnessed how they were beaten and talked to and treated. So, but his life as a child wasn't as hard because he worked in the kitchen inside the house as a server instead of outside in the fields. So he didn't have it as bad at that time. But at the age of 6, he was transported, sold to another slave. And so he left there and went somewhere else to live as a slave. And he was, his life was, uh, it talked about his transition from place to place, being a slave as a child. And one of his favorite places that he enjoyed living in was Baltimore. And once he got to Baltimore, his slave's wife was teaching him how to read. And she was so nice to him and just really was concerned and was helping him learn how to read. And once the slave's master, her husband, found out that that's what she was doing, he demanded for her to stop. He did not want her to educate him because he believed that an educated slave was a dangerous slave, and it was talk in the community about her, teaching him how to read. So she had to stop, and of course, after the talk with the husband, she began to change her ways. She began to get ugly and be mean toward him. And so his life there was no longer as great as it was from the start. But he continued to proceed in trying to learn how to read. And he also involved some of the local community boys to teach them how to read also. And shortly after that, he was sent somewhere else to live. And he really didn't really like that life, that owner and things. So, uh, because he was still contemplating on learning how to read and freedom, that was heavily on his mind. And that slave owner was like, he was totally against a slave being able to read. So that, I mean, he was another one. And I think all of the slave owners believed that it was that a slave shouldn't be able to read. So he believed that when you gain a little knowledge, you get too far out of hand. So he believed that Douglas had got too far out of hand, unmanageable. And so he decided to send him to one of the well-known slave owners that's known to break slaves and to get them back on track. And so when he went to live with him, of course, the mission was accomplished. He did break Douglas, uh, and he did not really enjoy reading and trying to gain freedom. That was no longer interest because he had broke his spirit. He has broken him emotionally, physical, mentally, and he was just beaten. He had to heal and recover. And after and it took him a long period before he got back to himself. And once he got back to himself, Frederick realized the mission and what he had to do. And so that was a little brief summary of what was going on in the book. And my favorite part of the book is when Frederick decided to fight one of his slave owners back. He was beating him, and he decided to fight back that time. And after that fight, I think the fight was like an hour or two long, and the slave owner decided that, you know, not to beat him anymore. So he didn't beat him anymore after that, after they had that fight. So that was kind of good for Douglas in a way. And Douglas was later sent back to Baltimore, where he began to focus more on his reading and freedom. And he ended up learning a trade. So that was a good part. One of my favorite parts in the book, where he continued to pursue his education, learning to read and learning the trade. So that was a good part in the book. And it was a really interesting book to read because it really depict the ins and outs about slavery, the life of a slave and his life. And it really talked about, to me, it just really talked about education, and back then how education, how it was such a valuable tool to have, and a trade was so valuable back then in those days. And as well as it is now today, as in having an education is very important, because the more education, the better job that you'll get. And it also, you know, talked about how he was treated because he did know the trade and on his job and stuff. And so that was really interesting, and it really pointed out and brought that home to me, as you know, getting an education is very important, and it's very, very valuable. It still is now today. And that was one of my favorite things also. And the book was very interesting, and I recommend that. It's a good book, and it's a good book to read, and it's easy to read, and recommend it for all to read, and you will enjoy it. And the lesson plan that I decided to do with my students was, we talked about living on a farm uh, in comparison to being on a plantation, um, how it was living on the duties and what all it entails living on a farm and raising farm animals and taking care of them, and what all your responsibilities are and different things. And we talked about the living like it would be on a plantation. And after that, we, you know, had discussion questions and different things to really give them some background knowledge on what was going on during that time, and how what slavery was about. And to go into depth detail, we end up watching the video of Frederick Douglas' life, to listen and to see the stories that he told, and to see how his life was during that time. And one of our biggest things that we created a project, which I set up information in different stations. Like, we had books that they would research, and newspaper articles and clippings and different things, resources for them to use. And we had vocabulary words that they would look up and get the definition of the meaning, so they would really know a little bit more, give them more details about slavery. And so with this information, they used their graphic organizer to organize all the information that they gathered. And they got on the computer and did research, and also on the computer they went into my storybook and created their story, and they were able to publish their story. So this gave the kids idea of how to research information and what's important and how to pick out important details and different pictures and stuff, and how to process writing and how to organize it and put it all together and to put it on paper, and also to teach them, good writing skills and how to write. So, and also they were able to publish their story. So overall, I think that this was good lesson for me to teach, and I felt like the students enjoyed it. So I thank you all for sharing and listening to me, and thank you.